Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. In recent days, Trump and his cabinet members have repeatedly called on allies to take the lead in stopping the purchase of foreign oil from China and India and to impose sanctions. Among them, the European Union has come under the most pressure. Some of their officials have started to wake up a bit, beginning to realize that Trump is actually scheming against the European Union. Since last week, there have been continuous reports that US President Trump has been pressuring the European Union, the Group of Seven, and NATO, urging them to impose so-called secondary tariffs of up to 100% on China and encouraging them to take similar measures against India in exchange for the US increasing its sanctions against Russia. According to Politico, a report from the European edition on September 16th stated that several EU officials said they believe that Trump just wants to set conditions that are difficult for the EU to accept, and then blame the EU for not taking tough action, thereby shifting the responsibility to them. Some analysts in European countries believe that Trump may also be seeking to set an economic trap, with the aim of making Europe buy more American liquefied natural gas and exploiting Europe's vulnerability to gain more geopolitical benefits. An official from a European government said, Trump is setting conditions that he knows are impossible to achieve. This will become his excuse later to tell us that the United States is powerless to help. In short, this is a game of shirking responsibility. Another European official also said that some people believe Trump's argument makes sense, but others think Trump is just looking for an excuse to stand by and do nothing. Another official from a G7 country told Politico, at last week's G7 finance ministers meeting, the G7 was in complete agreement on the necessity of supporting Ukraine and putting pressure on Russia. However, the EU was hesitant about Trump's demand to impose tariffs on China. This official said that the EU prefers to impose targeted sanctions on companies related to the Russia-Ukraine conflict rather than implementing comprehensive tariff measures. He said, "We are open to all of these options, but we want to use other tools." European officials believe that, in addition to possibly shifting responsibility, Trump also wants to set an economic trap. An EU official said he suspects that Trump has some kind of commercial motive. Imposing a 100% tariff on goods imported from China would exacerbate inflation levels in the EU and undermine the European economy. Lithuanian Minister of Energy, Dainius Kraivis, said that President Trump has revealed that the United States wants to exploit Europe's vulnerabilities to pursue its own geopolitical interests. A senior research fellow at the Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University in the United States, Colbo believes that Trump wants the EU to buy more American liquefied natural gas. Politico pointed out that the EU is currently pursuing risk reduction. They want the United States to stand with the EU against Russia, but at the same time hope to avoid a rupture with China. Europe is highly dependent on China economically. Although the EU has repeatedly advocated for supply diversification in recent years, in 2024, 21% of the EU's imported goods still come from China. Some EU officials have bluntly stated that if we give up trade with China and India, we will drown. What would we have left? An EU diplomat interviewed by Politico said, "We don't want to confront China and India, but we also have to do our utmost to cope with pressure from the United States." More people are questioning whether, even if the EU gives in to US demands and takes on enormous risks, the Trump administration may not even fulfill its promises. When responding to questions about US secondary sanctions, a spokesperson for China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs previously urged the US to abandon its erroneous practice of imposing sanctions, stating that China will take necessary measures to safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese enterprises and citizens. Simply put, whoever follows the US approach will face countermeasures from China. In summary, EU officials have only now realized that Trump has been calculating against them, which is rather slow on their part. The fact that Trump has already postponed tariffs on China 3 times shows that the US is not really going to go head-to-head with China. Secondly, although the EU has woken up late and has been played by Trump for a while, even understanding the changes in the international landscape does not mean the EU dares to say no to the US, because they've become accustomed to relying on the US for everything. Thirdly, from how this was handled, it's clear Trump only cares about interests, not allies. For profit, he'll exploit whoever is easiest first, regardless of country. On another note, looking at the US domestic situation, Trump's policies have also dealt blows to traditional elites. Not long ago, former President Clinton spoke about China-US interactions, stating his push for globalization was intended to delay China from surpassing the US. Recently, Al Gore, vice president during Clinton's administration, also publicly expressed views on this matter. Gore has also recently voiced his dissatisfaction with Trump's policies. 25 years ago, Gore was in the final sprint of his campaign for the US presidency, competing against Republican George W. Bush. At that time, Gore's campaign platform included ambitious climate action, and he believed that the United States should naturally be the global leader in environmental transformation. On September 16th, the American tech blog TechCrunch published an exclusive interview with Gore, noting that everything that happened afterward was rather ironic, and Gore is well aware of this. When asked how he views China having become the core force in the global energy transition, Gore admitted, "Looking back from 25 years ago, I have to admit this is the result I least expected." He said that the Chinese leadership's respect for the opinions of their scientific community has always been impressive. However, the report described that Gore does not regret China taking the lead in climate governance. Rather, he feels relieved that someone has finally stepped up, though he is also disappointed that the US has voluntarily ceded this field. In his view, as long as someone is driving sustainable development, the Earth will. He doesn't care which country takes the lead. What worries him more is the opportunity cost. If the United States weren't busy instead of focusing on dismantling its own climate policies, the United States could have used its innovative capacity and influence to accelerate global climate governance. After his failed presidential campaign, Gore devoted himself to environmental causes. His contributions to climate change and environmental issues have been internationally recognized. Together with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, he was awarded the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. When asked whether other countries should give up relying on the United States to play a leading role in long-term global challenges, Gore said that the US had played a crucial role in addressing climate change, but changes in political parties have led to policy shifts. Progress and regression. This is a regrettable global instinct. The world has greatly benefited from the United States' consistent and stable leadership, but a series of negative actions taken by the Trump administration did indeed cause setbacks. He said that other parts of the world are still moving steadily forward, and even the United States will continue to make progress, just at a slower pace. For Gore, who once hoped to sit in the Oval Office and lead US climate policy, the current situation would have seemed almost unimaginable at the time. Reports indicate that China is becoming the world's first electrified nation, while the United States has relinquished its leadership in the field of clean energy technology. Gore said the speed at which China is building solar power facilities is astonishing. They achieved their solar development target 6 years ahead of schedule. In recent months, China's newly added solar power capacity each day is roughly equivalent to the total installed capacity of 3 1-gigawatt nuclear power plants. This is simply incredible, according to the General Office of the State Council of China. The previously released work plan calls for implementing a dual carbon emission control system after reaching peak carbon emissions, with total quantity control as the primary focus and intensity control as the secondary focus. It will establish a carbon neutrality target and a coincidence evaluation system. Gore believes this is a clear signal, as China will never set unattainable standards for itself. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency recently proposed eliminating the requirement for thousands of coal-fired power plants and refineries to report greenhouse gas emissions. In Gore's view, this seems to be an attempt to make the crisis disappear by covering up the crisis data, he said. He remains optimistic about climate change and believes this transition is unstoppable. In an interview with Bloomberg on Tuesday, he also said that the Trump administration wants to increase oil, gas, and coal production while cutting subsidies for green energy. This energy policy is paving the way for China to expand its dominance in the future low-carbon economy. He further warned that China will dominate green energy in the future, while the United States will retreat from the clean energy sector. This reality will bring about a series of geopolitical impacts, including the reshaping of potential trade alliances. In the eyes of many countries, the steps taken by the United States have weakened its moral authority and its ability to lead globally. This will cause many countries to reassess the closeness of their relationship with China. In recent years, numerous foreign media outlets have focused on the progress China has made in its energy transition, pointing out that China's installed capacity of wind, solar, hydro, and nuclear power has surged, and that its greenhouse gas emissions are expected to peak ahead of schedule. Moreover, China has achieved this while its energy demand continues to grow, which is of great significance for global climate action. Industry insiders say that just as China is strengthening its leadership on climate issues, the Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement, doubled down on the oil economy and abandoned clean energy, exacerbating global difficulties and also endangering America's future. Climate scientists studying China's emissions data have recently discovered a positive signal. Various signs indicate that China's greenhouse gas emissions may have already stopped growing or even started to decline. The Sydney Morning Herald in Australia remarked with emotion that, if this is true, it would be a remarkable achievement. China originally expected to reach this goal by 2030, which makes it even more noteworthy. The key point is that China has achieved this while its energy demand is increasing. This is why these data are so compelling. Finland's energy and Milli Virta, chief analyst at Finland's Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, remarked that although we have long known China is accelerating the installation of wind and solar power, we are still shocked by the speed. The fact that clean power generation has outpaced the growth in electricity demand is both psychologically and emotionally significant. It is clear that China is fully capable of continuing to reduce emissions and can reach its peak even before 2030. A UK research institute also pointed out in March that China has a significant advantage in the clean energy sector, is globally competitive, and will maintain a robust growth trend. At the same time, under the goal of energy transition, developing clean energy technology industries is an inevitable choice for China. China is also a solid force in addressing climate change, and in the future, clean energy technologies will continue to support China's economic development. To sum up simply, for those traditional Western elites who believe that global cooperation is the only real way to save the planet from climate warming, the United States has developed into what they dislike most, while China has become the ideal eco-friendly nation in their mind.